And so to preface my talk, I'd actually like to start by just thinking about writing and why writing is so important at this time in the history of teaching literacy. To write is to create a text, usually for one or more people. In the current era, texts are often multimodal, although written language or linguistics remains central to most texts at some point in time. Writing is also associated with thinking. As to write, we must sort our thoughts and ideas into a shape that need to be understood by others. Although reflective writing is, of course, important, and that's for the audience of one. Deborah Brandt is a researcher that some of you may be familiar with. She's an American researcher, and she's conducted some very interesting longitudinal studies into adults writing in their workplace. The findings from Brandt's study has shed new light onto the role of writing in the lives of citizens in developed countries. According to Brandt, and this is from a text called The Rise of Writing, written in 2015, writing has always been used for work purposes, but writing itself has increasingly become the product that is bought and sold, as it embodies knowledge, information, invention, service, social relations, news, that is, the products of the new economy. She has identified how everyone from policemen to nurses to people working in a huge range of jobs spend a large part of their day or night writing associated with their work. What Brandt's work has highlighted is the central role of writing. And she says, perhaps for the first time in history of mass literacy, writing seems to be eclipsing reading as the literate experience of consequence. Now that's a big call. And today I'm actually talking about writing in the very first stages of school. Some of you may be aware of some of my work, which looks at the cross-section from preschool into school. So I'm going to try and see if I can zip through a couple of approaches or strategies to writing in the very start of school. First saying that our children, when they start school, can range in age between 4.5 and 6. And those of you who are teaching kindergarten or foundation will be very aware of that. Given the fact that our children can start as long as they're 5 before the end of July, we have 4.5-year-olds starting. But we also have parents who are keeping children home. And so those children have often turned 6. So we actually have a huge range in age, and that makes its own areas of challenge. Just realised I cannot see that. I may end up having to stand behind here so I can actually see what I'm looking at. So the key message I'd like you to take away from today is that with all literacy teaching, we need to start with what children bring, value that, and build on. So that's the key message. Start with what children know and can do and build on. Just to give you a bit of a refresher, this is a definition of literacies from Callantz's Cope and others. And I think it shows the complexity of what it means to be literate in today's world. And it's certainly more than reading and writing words. So to build on from that, and from Brandt's work, writing is effortful. It's hard work. As an academic, it's the hardest thing I do. I'm not sure about you in the audience, but how much work do you put into making sure those reports you write are clear and unambiguous? Just because it's a short text does not mean it isn't hard to do. In fact, I think the shorter the text, the more carefully you have to word the text. Your choice of words and your tone are so important. Recently, I challenged educational leaders in a workshop I was doing to label a cartoon in 10 words or less, and they found it very challenging. Kellogg talks about how writing, to be able to write a mature, well-developed text is like being able to play a musical instrument well, or to be a really strong chess player, that you need instruction and you need a lot of practice over time to refine these skills. So learning to write isn't something we do in the first couple of years at school. It's something we actually develop right across our careers and our lives. So what we're thinking about today is how we get that process going with young children, understanding that it's demanding both cognitively and physically. And unlike speech, it's not a natural process. Our brains have been wired to talk for a very long time, but our brains are not wired to read and write. And how we learn to read and write is determined by the cultural context we're born into. However, I've argued elsewhere that if children see a purpose for it, they will put the same effort into learning how to write as they have in learning how to read, as they have in learning how to speak, and all those other things they do because they think it's important. For example, the little guy who's crawling up the slippery dip in order to catch up to his brother, he can't walk yet, but he's been determined enough to crawl up that slippery slide. So we know children are incredibly resilient and they will work incredibly hard. What I want you to think about at this point, and I have no idea what time I'm up to. I didn't start till late. Karen, can you keep me, give me some warning. I'd like you to think about early scribble and early drawing as comparable to babbling. So what the babbling does for the young learner of speech, scribble and drawing does for the young child who will eventually become an accomplished writer. So thinking about that, we need to recognise that that stage is really important. Vygotsky referred to children's drawing as a process of sign creation. And by creation, he was suggesting that there are no rules. When you draw, you cannot be wrong. He also referred to conventional writing as sign use. That's when we are using the conventions of a particular language. Does that make sense? It's quite a nice way of thinking about it, isn't it? And it helps us with understanding this path or journey that children take. Now, one of the things we also have to realise is that in today's world of digital tools, a lot of children are not experiencing drawing and exploration in the way they did in the past. It's much easier to hand them an iPad or a phone to entertain them, particularly if you're out for coffee or lunch, than it is to arrive with the paper and the pencils and the crayons and the textures. I do quite a lot of work with parents, and parents say to me all the time, drawing is so messy, Noella. Yes, it is messy. But what we have to understand is that we're relying a lot on preschool and childcare centres to provide the experiences that children need. And I'm not talking about fine motor skill development today, that's a whole other presentation, but the importance of developing the message-making understandings for children. It starts long before they learn how to write letters and words, but we need to know where they've come from and where they're heading, and understand we may need to work closely with the early childhood providers in our area if we want to understand where they're coming from and if we want to assume certain learning. A couple of years ago, I had the privilege of visiting Finland, and in Scandinavia, Finland included, children don't start school till they're 7. But during preschool, the preschool year starts at 6. They don't try to teach children how to write anything other than their name. They do teach them the alphabet in uppercase letters, but the focus isn't on the conventional formalised writing. They work on developing the capital needed for writing when they start school at 7. And so they do lots of creative activities, they do lots of drawing, they do lots of things like puzzles, they play lots of games, as in board games, and they work on these kinds of skill development. I think we can actually learn from this. Our children are not going to stop coming to school until 7. We can't change that. But we can understand that you can learn a lot about writing without actually writing in a conventional way. Beautiful pictures, aren't they? That's Glasgow. About 12 months ago I was in Scotland working with the education department there. My pictures are for what reason? Who can call out what I'm showing here? Scaffolding. What's the important thing about scaffolding when we come to children and learning? Can somebody give me a bit of a wave and share in the conversation? What's important? Yes? It's temporary. Did everyone hear that? What happens to a scaffold if it stays too long? It becomes a dependency or a crutch. So we have to be really careful that our well-meaning scaffold does not turn into a dependency or a crutch. So I'm going to talk about 2 different approaches to early years learning at a million miles an hour that provide different kinds of scaffolding. The first one I'm going to talk to you about is draw, talk, write and share, and it's not rocket science. I've talked about it in this book, which some of you may be aware of, and if you're interested in having a look at it, you're welcome to come and have a look at the end. And we do have some flyers that will give you a reduced rate if you're interested in taking one away and ordering the book. What we're talking about here is an approach which builds on what children bring, but which allows their existing knowledge to scaffold their new knowledge. So instead of the teacher scaffolding the child, their existing knowledge is scaffolding themselves as they learn to write. So there's a lot of people, including Ganeshi and Dyson, who've been writing about the relationship, the strong relationship between drawing and talking and writing for many years. So this isn't new. We've known about it for a long time. But a lot of the pressures of high-stakes testing and other pressures have often taken away from our understanding of the importance of this existing knowledge. To put it in the words of a 5-year-old who was quite distressed, 5 weeks into kindergarten, he informed me that at school we don't get time to draw. Quite distressing for him and for me. So, as Ganeshi and Dyson have talked about, children should be able to spontaneously and simultaneously develop a repertoire of skills they need for writing, print being one of them. Now remember I introduced that description of literacies in today's world. Most of our texts are multimodal. So keep that in mind, because our children come to school in many cases being able to draw and talk. Drawing is one mode, talking is a second mode. We've got visual, we've got audio, and what we want to do is add the writing, so our children are multimodal right from the very beginning. If we say you don't have time to draw and shush, we don't want you to talk, then what we're doing is actually taking away what they already can do and saying now we want to give you a beautiful clean blank page and we're going to teach you how to write. But oh goodness, you're in grade 3 now, we'd actually like you to create a multimodal text and we'd like you to record it, so we need you to speak, we need you to illustrate, Oh, I don't know how to draw anymore. Lots of children stop drawing at 7. Isn't that sad? Okay, here's examples from 2 children who are 4-year-olds. On the left you can see a drawing created by a little guy called Charlie, and if you look you can see him trying to write his name. Can you see it? It's backwards, but he's off to a really good start. And on the right you can see a little girl called Brooke, and she's got lots of lovely little drawings in there, but she's also copying letters and creating letter-like symbols. These are 2 children who are doing this spontaneously before starting school, both preschoolers. The little guy who's done the one on the left could happily draw for an hour before he went to preschool. Before he went to school, while he was at preschool. His mother, you know, those of you who've had children will understand, the little one needed to have a sleep. The 4-year-old didn't want to go to bed. You need to do a quiet activity. The quiet activity became the drawing. And so his drawings became more and more detailed. The interesting thing about this is if we do encourage the drawing and the talking, it creates wonderful opportunities for some intentional teaching about the writing or the sign use. And you can see in the example here, Krisha could write her own name and her brother's name, but her preschool teacher helped by labelling some of the other pictures in the picture, and including the little sentence about the sun, and it's a hot day. That's all being composed by Krisha, but written by the preschool teacher. So again, we've got a multimodal text. This is one of my favourites, and I know I'm not in Melbourne this time, but I'm sure there's enough people in here that might be able to work out what that is. Who can tell me? Someone like to raise their hand? And okay, right up the back. It's an aerial drawing of an Australian rules football game. Isn't that amazing? This little guy's only been at school, it's the beginning of April. Now, his teacher has encouraged him to draw and write together. But you can see his writing. Can you imagine that particular sample minus that beautiful picture? Imagine how much of the complexity, the richness of his story that would be missing. He would have, I went to the football, 5 words on a blank page. If we are serious about recognising and valuing what children bring to school with them, their prior experiences, their current systems of meaning making, then we can introduce them to that newer system, one that they've often been experimenting with. Often they can write their name, even if it is backwards, and sometimes they've been playing around with those letters. There's another reason why the drawing can be so powerful. And I'll give you a moment to read the cartoon. Who's ever suffered from procrastination? I've been known to clean my entire house when I've got a new paper to start. Getting started is the hardest part for me. I love co-authoring when somebody else is happy to make the first attempt and then I'll come in. But regularly in my job, I have to make the first attempt. I've thrown out lots of first pages and first drafts. We don't give children that opportunity. And we face them with lots of blank pages. Now, I want you to also have a look at the complexity of the text here. There's 2 texts created by a little guy. And I want you to think about, here in this case they're non-fiction, and look at the detail in the drawings that go with the pictures. It's quite stunning, isn't it? Imagine if we told that child we don't have time to draw at school. Here's another example. I think the mathematicians in the room might get excited by this one too. This child created this at home, not at school. on a day in his school holidays because he loved to draw. He knew lots about sea creatures and he just decided to draw all the ones that he knew and label them. That's a very rich text and it's a combination of the drawing and the writing. Some people get really nervous when I talk about drawing. They say, oh, but the kids will never stop drawing. They'll just keep drawing and drawing and drawing. That probably tells you that they're a bit nervous about the actual writing. But what we've found is if we do start this process off with the drawing and the talking, as the children become more confident with the writing, they will switch over and they will do it of their own accord. And in fact, we've recorded children who, throughout the one text, go draw, talk, write, talk, draw, talk. They move around because they understand they can. And they learn from each other. It's amazing. Now, some of you might have seen these examples before because they're some of my favourites. The story is, it was at school I was working with. It was Easter. They were all going off to Easter services at different churches around the town. It was a country town. After they came back, I was visiting, and this gorgeous teacher used to just drop everything every time I walked through the door and told the kids it was time for drawing and talking and writing. She was amazing. It didn't matter if it was 9 in the morning or it was 1 in the afternoon. This happened to be the afternoon. And these two children had been to different churches on different buses. Now you can see the little girl's story at the top in terms of the written text, but looking at her drawing, who can tell me what was really important to her? Louder? The church. Who said the church? Okay, what's your evidence? The details. What sort of details? Stained glass, archway, the cross. It's quite amazing. Looking at her text at the top, do you think she actually had the written language to say, well, I was impressed by the architecture of the church. I noticed the archway. I noticed the stained glass windows. I saw the crazy part. Did she have that language? Not to write, but could she draw it? Absolutely, she could draw it. Now, this is her mate. This is the little guy she was working with. He was her drawing, writing and talking partner. What was important to him? The bus ride. It's stunning, isn't it? So, people worry about children copying. I actually find children teach each other a lot. They learn together. And so these two samples I absolutely love because they show two totally different perspectives. But if I take the picture away, it's almost the same, which is understandable when children don't know many words yet. It's like saying, you can write your reports, but I'm going to restrict you to a 20-word vocabulary. No more than 20 words. So for these children, we need to understand that the drawing and the talking adds to their ability to make meaning. It's powerful. It's not rocket science, but it's incredibly powerful. In this example, I watched, this is another kindergarten child, I watched the process. He sat at his desk with his other co-learners. In this case, you can see he was confident to start writing first. And I'll read you his text because he actually did leave one word out. But when he read it to me, he included it. My family is a superhero family. Mum, Dad, Talia, Ellen and me live here. Mum and Dad share a room. And then he's labelled where everybody sleeps. Now, I watched him go through the process and then later we had a conversation. And the thing that fascinated me was can you see the chimneys? And see the guy flying out? I wanted to know about this, so I asked him to explain. And he looked at me like I was a bit daft. You know how 5 and 6-year-olds can do that? And he said, well, you're not a superhero. So if you came to my house, you'd think it was just an ordinary house. You wouldn't see our superhero chimneys. That's how we fly out at night to do our superhero work. And when we come home, we fly back in. Can you see the arrow? Yeah. Now, how rich is that text? It's phenomenal, isn't it? And here's an example of a child who can now confidently start with the text, the written words, and add his drawing. Sometimes he does it the other way around. It depended on his feeling of the day, how prepared he was, a whole lot of reasons. Okay, so what we found is that if children were encouraged to do this, the complexity of their texts increased remarkably. But the other thing we found was there were no blank pages. Everybody had a starting point, whether it was drawing or whether it was writing. They had a way to start. We also discovered that if we allowed this process to occur, teachers told me that they had more time to actually observe what children were up to. Because everyone was engaged, they could move around and work with children in small groups or as individuals. Now, I'm hoping this is going to work. I'm going to hold my breath and let's see if I can get the words of a teacher and a principal about this process. A teacher, now I'm hoping if I hit that, am I going to lose the whole lot? It's always scary, isn't it? I'll go back this way, that might be the safest. Okay, the other temporary support I wanted to talk about in our very, very short time, because sometimes when I talk about Draw, Talk, Write, people say, but when do I teach them what it is they need to learn? My favourite strategy for teaching children in that early years, particularly kindergarten and grade 1, is the strategy of interactive writing. And you may know a number of different versions of interactive writing. But the version I'm talking about, I've explained in Practical Literacy, that's a 2015 one, as well as it's talked about in the chapter I've written with Marion Nicolazzo in our new book. What I'm talking about here is children working with the teacher so that the teacher and peers are co-constructing and therefore scaffolding each other's learning. And this particular approach to interactive writing has been researched by Prof and Guinea in 2011. And what they found was they had a control group and they had the interactive writing group. And you can see from on the screen that the children in the interactive writing group, which was 10 minutes a day. Now, in fairness, I have to say in the study they went from 7 to 18 minutes. But it was about an average of 10 minutes a day. The children improved better than the control group in all of those different areas. So you're talking about ideas, organisation, word choice, sentence fluency, spelling, capitalisation, punctuation and handwriting. It's a pretty big call. So in interactive writing, what we're doing is we're scaffolding the processes of composing, recording, editing and publishing. And I'm just going to give you the very briefest introduction to that. I've got a beautiful example I wanted to share, but we're not going to have time for that. The goal is to teach children the specific skills that you want to teach. And you can do it just with chart paper on a chart stand like the example you're seeing there. That's certainly how I first saw it. When I first saw it demonstrated, it was being demonstrated by someone who was a reading recovery teacher, and half-time was reading recovery and the other half-time was classroom teacher. And she had adapted this process to work for her children. The key is that think aloud, that the teacher is working alongside the children and sharing the pen and thinking aloud and teaching on the run. This requires retrospective programming rather than preempting what I'm going to teach. You teach on the run. It's a daily process. I have seen it adapted to 3 days a week, but it's originally designed to be 5 days a week. Day 1, the children and the teacher compose a text Just a sentence, one sentence. The second day, you read yesterday's and you add a text. The third day, you read Mondays and Tuesdays and add a sentence. So it goes on. It's a great way of teaching children that you don't do a text just in one go, that you can build on. You know how we have children that think every time, they open up the writing book, it starts all over again? Instead of let's build on yesterday's, this teaches them how to build across a week. Every day. And there's so much reading involved. The reading in interactive writing is key to why it's such a successful reciprocal process. Okay, so here's an example of a class, a kindergarten class. On day one, they wrote about the bears. And so the topic has been, the seed for the topic's been planted by the teacher. In some classrooms, it's related to a text that they've been reading. In others, this is a topic these children have been reading about. So on Monday, you can see their text, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. So by the end of the week, they've got quite a substantive text that they have co-constructed. Now the teacher has chosen to teach specific elements of grammar, of spelling, of letter-sound relationships, building on across the week. And if we had time, I would deconstruct those and show you why she's chosen to do what she's chosen. That was going to be my nice little example, but we're not going to get time. I've got 5 minutes, so I won't have time, which is really quite... do you reckon we can just watch it fresh? Okay, I would love to share this with you and okay, I'm agreeing on behalf of the university. So, okay, now I just need to give you a little bit of explanation as to what we're seeing. Okay, a few years ago I worked with a group of teachers in Wagga. This guy, the teacher who's kindly letting me see into his classroom and share this, was a second year out teacher. He came along to my research group, but his school was quite a long way from where we were working. And he said to me one day, Noella, if I put a camera in the back of my room and I film some segments of my teaching, think about this, folks, would you talk with me about it and help me with my teaching discussions and my moves, Second year out teacher. I was blown away by it. This is not perfect, so please do not pick him apart. We're looking at it from the point of view of interactive writing. I said to him at the end, can I share this? And he has said to me, yes, you can as long as you're there, because I know you'll protect me. But it's not allowed to get out there. Okay, so this is quite privileged. Now, what you choose to teach is up to you, same as Jesse was making his decisions. One of the extra things I'd like to point out is that at the end of the week, Jesse would print it off. The children did draw, and they took it in turns at illustrating the week's text. They also used Draw, Talk, Write as their independent writing process, but he used to print it off properly in A3 form for the classroom wall, and he'd give the children an A4 copy to take home at the end of the week. So the texts that they constructed became the texts that they were reading. And me coming in as an outsider, the children were absolutely delighted to read me their texts that were around the room. So rich text opportunities both for reading and writing. And at the beginning of the next year, remember I said it was a low SES school, I received emails from the classroom teachers teaching year 1 and the reading recovery teacher at the school saying, wow, we've not had children coming out of kindergarten into grade 1 with such strong writing as we've got this particular year. And so these are a couple of examples of the children that Jessie taught that year as they started grade 1. So it's pretty impressive, isn't it? Absolutely. So what I want you to think about is that we've got two strategies there that both involve scaffolding. The one is letting children's existing skill of drawing and writing, as drawing and talking, scaffold them as they learn to write independently. And the second is using the group to scaffold each other with the teacher as they co-construct and learn about writing as a community of learners. It's a really powerful duo, those two things working together. If you've got any questions, I do believe I have to stop, but as I said, I'm happy to share the book if you want to have a look at our book, which is called Understanding and Supporting Young Writers, From Birth to 8, or if you'd like to ask me any questions over lunch, I'm happy to answer those. So thank you very much.